You're watching BionicDance. Don't run on automatic, instead, please think.
Well, just a few weeks ago, I learned that for the first time in its history, Harvard University, which was instituted for religious purposes, it was named for a minister of the gospel. For the first time in its history, the incoming freshman class at Harvard has more atheists and agnostics than professed Christians and Jews. And at the same time, I learned, almost simultaneously, that the legislature out in California had voted for assisted suicide, to legalize assisted suicide. And in fact, now the governor has in fact signed that bill into law. Now, I know it might seem a little bit peculiar, but I think there's a very strong connection between those two facts.
Let me get this straight. Atheists are going to Harvard, which is somehow related to a state clear across the country voting to allow assisted suicide. Peculiar? I think it sounds outright daffy. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. Today we're talking about Bishop Robert Barron, who, I guess, can only walk diagonally. He's going to take a kind of roundabout way of saying it, but he'll explain how he thinks assisted suicide is bad and atheism's fault. He's also going to demonstrate that he doesn't know what assisted suicide is, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be too surprised that this incoming class of sort of the future American aristocracy is becoming increasingly non-religious.
Aristocracy? Seriously? Okay, sure, by one of the looser definitions, advanced education can qualify one as an aristocrat. But generally speaking, an aristocrat is someone with wealth and power, and often hereditary nobility, like dukes and earls and the like. But even if we grant this distinction, making this connection between the aristocracy and atheism is silly. Plenty of people who in no way qualify as the upper class are or have recently become atheists. Take me. I've been an atheist all my life, and I went to film school, ended up doing CGI for video games and independent movies, which doesn't exactly pay tons. And I'm just one of many examples. So talking about the elite like this gives the false impression that only they are becoming the next generation of atheists.
These young people have been, bathed for their whole lives in the corrosive acids of relativism and materialism and scientism. They've been given pretty much anything that money can buy, but they've been denied, sadly, the thing that the human heart most longs for, which is the transcendent.
Let's take a moment to examine that statement critically. A priest, nay, a bishop, which is a position that requires celibacy, I looked it up, who clearly has no children of his own, believes he knows what the home life, and I presume the education, is like for today's youth, and claims that the human heart craves the transcendent, a notion about which he's not exactly unbiased. So basically, we've got a guy who is several steps removed from his topic, claiming that everybody must want what he wants. I can't be the only one seeing a problem with this particular statement.
And so if you are raised in that kind of culture, well then, the secularist atheist point of view is going to seem natural.
And vice versa. But it seems that this guy would prefer to believe that his point of view is the right one, no question about it. Seems just a wee smidge arrogant. Never mind that what seems natural may not be so. That's another that works both ways. Perspective-based bias does nobody any favors when the goal is to understand reality.
Paul Tillich, the Protestant theologian, long ago taught us that human beings are built for worship. We're built to worship God, and in the absence of God, we'll worship something else.
Once again, a God-botherer makes a deeply biased claim about the nature of humanity. He digs on worship, and so too must everybody else. The closest I've ever come to worship has been fandom, be it of movies, TV shows, actors and directors, musicians and bands, whatever. And as comparison to religious worship goes, that's not even close. It's not like I ever pledged my eternal soul to George Lucas or sacrificed a virgin to Roxette, best band ever, by the way. And I'm definitely not afraid to stop digging any of these people or bits of entertainment. Goodness knows that my awe and respect for his holy Lucas dropped a fair bit after the prequels. And I know I won't spend eternity in torment for thinking Joss Whedon is great too. So don't give me this humanity is built for worship malarkey. Maybe that's what floats your ducky, but I not only can go without, I feel much better for it.
I've often spoken about wealth, pleasure, honor, and power as the four great substitutes. I think in our time, though, another one's emerged, which is freedom itself. Freedom itself has become the absolute value, what we worship in our secular culture.
This is something I see religious people do all the time. They seem so unable to conceive of a life without religion that they have to take something, anything that an atheist does that's even remotely similar to religious worship, if only in flavor, and declare that to be worship being done in religion's place. Because everybody has a religion slot in their brain that needs filling. Except that not everybody does. That's like saying that everybody needs to fill a downhill skiing space in their lives, whether it's with skiing or some other sport. The notion that any other sport we choose, or deciding to have no sports in our lives at all, isn't a rejection of or substitute for skiing isn't something they're prepared to consider. And yeah, I think freedom is great, but that's as far as it goes. I don't worship freedom, whatever that would even mean. He's really reaching here.
But now contrast that to the Bible. Go back to the very beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis. What do you find but God's good creation getting off the rails precisely at the moment when human beings decided we can create ourselves? So in that inexhaustibly beautiful poetry of Genesis, when they grasp at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what that is a grasping at self-invention, self-creation, putting themselves in the place of God.
So let's see if I've got this right. A book of stories that some people have taken far too seriously describes a God who created a universe, put two people in it well within reach of a tree that, if he's as powerful as is claimed, he should already know is going to get harvested, and one of these people decides to go reinvent herself, despite the fact that she's allegedly innocent and that God's arch-rival tells that naive little tramp that it's totally cool. This is somehow humankind worshipping freedom of the self and thus knocking over God's sandcastle. And inexhaustibly beautiful poetry? I've written filthy limericks more beautiful than Genesis.
What's God's project? His project is called A People Israel. And the people Israel are a people now formed after his own mind and heart. A people who will, in a peculiar way, listen to God, be shaped by God's mind, by God's purposes.
I won't be the first to point out that this sounds like God is playing The Sims, or that this seems pretty damned arrogant, even tyrannical. But the truly horrible part is that this guy thinks that being a puppet is the preferable of the two most prominent possibilities, that somehow being the master of your own self is not merely false worship, but also detrimental to everything. What kind of a life is that?
I think beautifully, the term Israel has the sense in Hebrew of someone who wrestles with God. Beautiful, isn't it?
Usually when you're wrestling with someone, it means you're trying to beat them. They're your opponent. But if you mean it in the sense of wrestling with a difficult concept, okay. But this means that God isn't exactly playing the straight and narrow with humanity, doesn't it? And then you act surprised when people say, bugger this crap, and take charge of their own lives instead. And all of this hinges on whether or not a God even exists in the first place, which we're supposed to take on faith. And still you're surprised when people aren't super enthusiastic. Frankly, I'm surprised religion has lasted as long as it has. Either that or my opinion of humans is more positive than I'd like to pretend, and people are far more gullible than I'd like to believe.
Now look at someone like St. Paul, who was fully formed in the Israelite tradition, knew the whole biblical thing I've been talking about. When he meets the risen Jesus, what does he do? He utterly turns his life over to him. So Paul can say, it's no longer I who live. It's Christ who lives in me. His life isn't about him, it's about Christ. He can say that he's the doulos Christou Jesu. That means he's the slave of Christ Jesus.
So what he's saying is that religious people are bottoms. Got it.
But see, in all that, what does Paul find? Freedom. It's not a dehumanizing move. Read Paul's letters. Do you ever get the sense that here's someone that's not, confident, that doesn't have a keen sense of himself? Of course not. He becomes fully himself in the measure that he is Israel.
And he seems to think that this isn't possible, indeed quite destructive, to try to find this within oneself, without the help of God or Jesus. But one must then ask, is he merely projecting his own inadequacies, perhaps his own fears, onto everybody else?
Now, all this brings me back to the Harvard class and assisted suicide.
I told you you'd be doing this in a very roundabout way.
See, if you say there's no God, or God's an irrelevancy, then your life belongs to you. It's your life. Do with it what you want. You seek pleasure, you seek happiness the way you see fit. And when your life becomes tiresome or boring or a burden on other people, well, isn't it your prerogative to snuff it out? When someone else's life, the unborn, the elderly, become burdensome, annoying, well, shouldn't we have the right in law to get rid of them?
And I told you that he didn't know what assisted suicide is. You're not snuffing your life out just because you're bored or unhappy. Assisted suicide is reserved for people who are terminally ill and in a double-wide buttload of pain. Their lives are inches from over and they're in agony. Suicide is a way to end that perpetual suffering sooner rather than later, when there's no way it'll end on its own or be fixed by doctors. And the patient has to be vetted by psychiatrists and MDs to see that they are of sound mind and terminally ill. This isn't just some willy-nilly, spur-of-the-moment, do-whatever-you-like death. And the way it's done shows a clear respect for human life, not indifference. And it also shows no indifference to suffering. That is what assisted suicide means, and this guy doesn't seem to know that at all.
See, a deep indifference to human life will follow immediately from the bracketing of God.
Telling atheists how we're going to feel about human life? That's a paddlin'.
Because then my life belongs to me, and human life in general belongs to us. We can decide what to do with it. The biblical view is, no, your life does not belong to you. It's a gift from God. It finds itself in relation to God.
My life is a gift from God? Does he do exchanges? Did he keep the receipt?
What threatens life is atheism, is the setting aside of God.
You could not have it more backward. If there is no God, then this life is all the more precious because it's all we get. When we die, it's over, forever, done, kaputski, finito. But you religious lot? If any of you die, there's this eternal afterlife to go to. If anybody is going to devalue life, wouldn't it be the folks to whom life is basically heaven's waiting room? Think about it.
And that's why, see, I find it's a portentous omen that this freshman class in the most elite university in America is now predominantly atheist or agnostic. That's not just a trivial fact. Atheism is not a parlor game. Atheism represents a supreme threat to humanity.
How so? No, really, what's the thinking here? Are atheist doctors coming out of Harvard going to start their hospital internships handing out razor blades for patients to use on their wrists? Are they all going to be the next Mengele, who was Catholic, by the way? Is that it? I mean, okay, so according to this guy, atheists devalue life. All right. And then what? I'm an atheist. Which anti-humanity group should I be joining to get maximum death out of my unbelief before someone else takes me out? Is this sounding ridiculous enough yet? Seriously, the guy seems reasonable enough in tone, but he's like those nutters who predict the apocalypse is coming every 6 months or so. Lots of doom and gloom, but nothing specific. And I'm spent. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think. People not subscribing to BionicDance is one sign of the apocalypse. Save us all. Subscribe now.